Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chicago IANDS. This beautiful June day in 2023, June 10th. We're going to take a brief moment, as we usually do, for a short meditation so we can all kind of get connected psychically. So if you have things on your lap, you might want to put them to the side and get yourself in a position that's comfortable so that you can relax and allow yourself to briefly go where you go when you go. Welcome back. Can everybody hear me all right? No?
No one could.
We had trouble with this last time. I don't know what's going on. Don't know what's going on at all. Try to raise up my. Is that any better?
We can hear you now. We just couldn't
Can
hear
you
you.
hear me now?
We can
Can
hear
hear
you now, just not the flute playing.
I'm not hearing anybody. Anybody who's not. Sandy, you're not muted,
Just what the other
but I
person.
can't hear you.
Oh, can't
Is
hear
your
the.
volume turned up?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
So is mine.
Mhm.
That's really difficult.
Mhm.
Is that better?
I can hear you.
Now I can hear you too.
Oh, we couldn't hear the flute, but we could hear you when you would catch your breath to blow into it, but we couldn't hear the flute itself and can hear you talking.
Let me play a note or two and tell me if you can hear now.
Yes, can hear it now.
Okay, maybe we got it fixed. I don't know. Anyway, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
A couple of brief announcements. One is that we had a really successful 25th anniversary last month. We had a small but lovely party at Ruby of Siam's restaurant in Skokie, where we always used to meet after the meetings. And our winner of the auction was John Fish, who donated $250, which is helpful. We don't take in enough to cover our meeting, our ongoing expenses for the meeting, and we pay for various things that have to be paid whether we are in the hospital or not. So that was a help. And if we had a nice get together, we're going to leave it open that anybody in the area that wants to go for dinner at Ruby's is welcome. You can kind of meet each other there. I probably will be there most of them, but probably not tonight because this was my birthday and I still have so much food, leftover birthday food, that I think I'm going to stay home tonight and eat. But and I wanted to mention that next month our speaker is Pam Kircher. She spoke to us once about 15 or 20 years ago. And she's been a friend for close to 30 years. She's a doctor and she's from Colorado. And she's was a family practice physician, and she's was also a hospice doctor. And she had a near-death experience when she was about 5, I think. And she wrote a book called Love is the Link, which is a wonderful, wonderful book if you haven't read it. And it's available on Amazon. And I'm very, very proud of her. She's my age. She'll be 70 in 80 in a few months. I just turned 80 on Wednesday. And she'll be 80 in a few months. And she has Alzheimer's. And she's going to speak to us next month anyway. She's very interested in people who have spiritually transformative experiences who have Alzheimer's. She wants to know if anybody has any dementia or any problems, especially it's a good time to come because there'll be a lot of information one way and the other, I'm sure, about it. I don't know how she's doing all this, but she's an amazing, amazing person. And it'd be great to give her a good audience and hear what she has to say, because if we live long enough, all of us are going to get old. And when you get old, things start wearing out. And one of them is your memories and the possibility of getting Alzheimer's. So hope you'll be able to tune in next month. Meanwhile, we just had a nice connection. Ellyn is from Virginia Beach, IANDS, and is on the East Coast. And I lived there in Delaware for 10 years, so it's old home week for me, and I'm really glad that she could join us today. I'm going to let her tell you all about herself and as she her experiences. So mentally, if not physically, give a warm welcome, please, to our speaker, Ellyn Dye.
Hello, everybody.
You're on.
It's lovely to be here. And as Diane said, I'm in Virginia Beach. And did I just go off Zoom? I'm seeing something funny. Anyway, I live in Virginia Beach and originally from the Washington, D.C. area where I lived most of my life. And I was a member and board member of the Maryland IANDS group. And then I moved down here and I became a member and a board member of the Virginia Beach IANDS group. So although I'm not on the board anymore, but I am, let's see, I do reconnective healing. I am an intuitive coach. And I'm an author, and you can read all about that in the biography that Diane sent around. I have a couple disclaimers at the beginning here. First, my cat Sasha loves to be on camera. He's already made an appearance, but he may make another one. So, you know, he kind of comes in at appropriate times as an exclamation point to whatever I'm talking about. And the other one is I really want to thank Diane publicly for all the hand-holding she had to do. Have you ever had something firmly lodged in your brain and you know something is a certain way and somebody tries to explain to you that no, it's not that way? and you just can't quite wrap your head around it. So because there's a time difference, when Diane said, you know, we meet at 2 o'clock and there's a 1 hour time difference, in my head, it was 1 o'clock for me. And so I called her up and I said, where is everybody? And she had to kind of talk me down, but that's very unusual because I'm usually late for things rather than an hour early. So, but I really appreciated that. And so many things in my life become, you know, teaching moments for myself and possibly for others. So I was in the hour that I was waiting, I was thinking about that whole thing. It's like, why did that happen? And I thought, you know, right now in the United States, it's like people have very fixed ideas about certain things. And often they're so fixed in their heads, myself included, that, you know, sometimes we can't even have a conversation with somebody who has a different viewpoint. But when we give up the possibility of ever being wrong, that's a problem. And I just have a feeling that you know, what the time difference and the time designation for me today was probably not the only time, especially this summer, that I am going to be confronted with something that shows me that something that I thought was correct was actually wrong. So note to self, be a little more fluid with those beliefs. So speaking of fluid, I had a very fluid experience many years ago. In 1985. Well, should I start there? Now let me start earlier. Okay. I started out as a kind of a psychic child, and with a very interesting childhood. That's a word. I was put up for adoption. I was adopted as an infant. Then my adoptive mother, who from now on, when I say mother, I mean my adoptive mother. My adoptive mother died when I was 12. And then a few years later, I got a stepmother. And but when I was 12, I was asleep in my bed, and my mother was in the hospital dying of cancer. And I suddenly woke up because my mother was standing at the end of my bed. And, you know, she basically said, everything's going to be all right. I love you. I'll always be near you and watching over you, and everything will be okay. It might be difficult, but everything will be okay. And, you know, by the time I fully woke up and realized what was going on completely, you know, she was gone. And I walked out into the living room, and I told my grandmother, who had been staying with my brother and me while my dad was at the hospital, I told her that I thought my mother had died. And she said, oh no. And then the phone rang, and it was my father calling from the hospital. So I credit my mother for putting my feet firmly on the path of the seeker, because at that moment, I realized there was a lot more going on than they teach you in Sunday school. And I was going to learn what it was. So I really put my feet on that path of the seeker's journey. And at that point, and just kept going. And in high school, when other girls were sneaking out of the house to go on dates with boys, I got accused of doing that, but actually I was sneaking out of the house to go to seances. So I was a weird little kid, and very woo-woo. And even then, I just knew things that I didn't have any reason or really kind of capability at that point to know, but I knew things, which my father found extremely disconcerting. And I was usually accused of eavesdropping a lot, which I didn't do. I just knew stuff. So, so that I carried on with that. I'd read everything I could get my hands on. I remember reading the Seth material when it first came out, and that kind of blew up my head. And then I read Raymond Moody's book, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a few of those things. And meanwhile, I'm kind of going through life and just struggling along, and you know, in jobs and trying to support myself, and not really having a direction other than studying all of this metaphysical stuff. And I have to say that I kind of used it as a club. I had very low self-esteem. And so here I had all of this metaphysical knowledge, and I kind of used it to make myself feel superior to other people. And I'm sure that was just really annoying to others, but but you know, what can I say? So in 1985, I was driving down the road. It was Columbus Day weekend on Columbus Day, and I had just returned the videos to the video store that I had been binge watching all weekend. Excuse me. And then I was going to go to the grocery store. So I'm going down the road. It's a 2-lane road. Only one other car coming the other way. And we got to an intersection that had a traffic signal, and the traffic signal was green. And all of a sudden, the other car that was coming in my direction veered over into my lane. And I realized we were going to have a head-on collision. And I had just enough time to recognize that. And I think I got my foot off the accelerator, but I don't think I got my foot onto the brake. And the next thing I knew, I was hovering above my car about 12 or 15 feet. And it took me a second to figure out, what just happened and what am I looking at? And I realized I was looking at the top of my car. It was like, well, how did I get up here? And I realized it wasn't like I had been thrown out into a tree or anything. It's sort of like my body was still in that car. So that, what does that make me? Who am I? If I can think these things and I can see the top of my car, but my body's in the car. And fortunately, I had all this metaphysical knowledge. And I went, wow, cool, this is really neat. I'm out of my body. And so I saw the other driver got out of the car and he walked over. And I thought, isn't that sweet? He's looking to see if I'm okay. And he walked over and he reached in my window and he turned off my headlights. And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was a little odd. And but about that time, I kind of lost interest. And I thought, shouldn't there be like a tunnel of light somewhere? And as soon as I thought that, in it came, like from the right. It kind of swooped in with a whoosh. And I could see the light, but more important, I could feel it. And it beckoned to me. It called me. It pulled me toward it. Not that I was fighting it, because I was like, wow, I want to go there. And I could already feel this sweetness and this peace and this calm that I had never felt before. And I thought, wow, this is really good. And at the same time, I was feeling this expansiveness of being out of the confines of a body, and how huge of an essence I really am. And if anybody's old enough to remember when we wore girdles, being in a body is worse than that. I felt like I had been crammed in to this tight-fitting costume for so long, and then suddenly I was free and I could breathe. And all of these things are going through my head as I'm going through this tunnel. And as I went farther into the tunnel, the sweeter, the sweeter the energy felt, and the more buoyant I felt, and the more like I was coming back into my own element after having been out of my element for my entire life. And I got to the end of the tunnel, and I was in this environment of white light. And I just basked in it, because there were so many sensations and understandings of that light that were happening. I understood that it was conscious. I understood that I was standing in the heart of the creative energy of the universe. I felt that I was standing in complete unconditional love and bliss and peace and joy beyond anything I had ever experienced since I'd been in a body. And yet it felt so familiar. It felt like home. It felt like I was back where I was supposed to be, where I belonged. And that when I was in that body, it was as if I had been, like, if you've ever been at the ocean, the waves come into up on the sand, and sometimes there's foam and it'll throw some water up onto the sand, and some water can get, some drops can get caught in little gullies or indents in the sand, and then the wave retreats. And I felt like I had been one of those little pockets of ocean water that had been stranded up on the sand. But somehow the wave had come back and grabbed me and brought me back into the ocean where I belonged. And that was the feeling. And it felt, everybody says there are no words, and there really aren't. I mean, and I'm a writer. There are no words, because it's so exquisite and so perfect and so wonderful. And you just sort of want to be there and bask in it for eternity. And that's kind of the way it felt that I was doing that. So at some point I realized that there was this kind of crowd that had formed. And I saw all of these people who were all like, oh my God, look at you, you're back, you're home, we're so glad to see you. And it looked like there were like hundreds of people there, and I knew every single one of them. And not necessarily from this life, but I knew them all. And of course, the one who kind of came forward out of the group was my mother, who had died when I was 12. And that was a beautiful reunion, because she said, I'm so proud of you. You've done such a wonderful job, and I've watched over you every single day. And, when you were, I hope you could feel my presence, because I celebrated with you, with your triumphs. And when you were in despair, I put my arms around you to comfort you. And we're all just so proud. And I was sitting, I was there. I was happy. It was wonderful to see her, but at the same time, I'm hearing this and I'm like, well, what are you proud of? I haven't done anything. I'm a total mess. It's like I was gonna be the big important journalist. I was gonna do all of this stuff, and I ended up, I'm a secretary, for heaven's sakes, because that's the only job I could find when I got out of college. And I've been trying to break out of that, and I can't, and I just feel like a total failure, because I haven't, I'm in my mid-30s, and I'm not married, and I haven't had kids, and I haven't done all of those things. And since I didn't do that, I should have had a good career, and I didn't do that either. And I feel like I'm kind of like, a total screw up. And I'm glad you're proud of me, but you're seeing something I'm not seeing. And she said, we know how hard it is on planet Earth. We know. And just by getting up every morning and putting one foot in front of the other and trying, we're proud of you for that, because it's really hard. And everybody on Earth thinks it's all about the accomplishments, and that's not what's important. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I saw, I had this reunion that lasted about 200 years, it felt like, because there's no time on the other side. And, I talked and laughed. I saw aunts and uncles and grandparents and people from other lives. The most fascinating thing to me was this one man, relatively young. Now, they all looked young, I have to tell you. But this young man walks up and greets me, and I knew immediately that this was my birth father. And they had closed adoption records where I was born, and so I had no idea. I had no information whatsoever about my biological family. I knew from a very young age, they had told me that I had been adopted, but I had no information about my birth family. And here's this man, and I knew him immediately. I knew who he was. And both of his parents were with him, and my biological grandfather was there. And I knew them. And my mother and my aunts and uncles and my grandparents are all standing around with them. And I'm like, this was all planned, wasn't it? And I realized there was even like there were contingency plans involved. And I'm like, whoa, it's a lot more complicated than I thought it was. And they're like, yeah. And it's like, all right. So, I stood there and talked for a long time. And then I thought, I think I'm supposed to see somebody else, but I don't know who it is. And at the same time, I was really getting, I guess, tired in a way of everything being white light. And I thought it would be really helpful if there was some color or some three-dimensional aspect to where I am, because this all white stuff is like, I don't quite know how to interact with it. And as soon as I thought that, this landscape appeared, as if this hand came up and with finger paints and painted it. I thought, yeah, that's much better. And I could see, trees and grass and flowers and birds, and everything was vibrant and alive, and colors that we don't even have on this planet, or that we can't see on this planet. And it was just beautiful. But the best part was that all of the dogs and cats that my family or I had who had passed all came running through and greeted me, and they were all having the best time, chasing each other and rolling in the grass and playing, and that was really nice. So because by that point there were a couple of dogs and several cats who had passed, and they were all there. And I saw this, there were some woods over to the right ahead of me, and a pathway, and I walked down the pathway, And through the woods, I went over this little, there was a little stream. I went over a little bridge and through some more woods, and then came out into this clearing where there was like a gazebo structure in the middle of this clearing. And I could see that there were people standing there in the gazebo, but I had no idea who they were, but I felt like I was supposed to go talk to them. So I went over and I found myself standing in a circle of beings of light who were maybe 12 to 15 feet tall. And I'm 5'5", 5'4.5". So it was one of these things where I was just, hi, you know. But they weren't, the size would have been intimidating, but they weren't, because the energy of them was just like, if love was alive, this is what they felt like. Oh, and here is Sasha, just as I talk about the beings. Hello. And so we talked for a long, long time. And I basically said, you know, it was funny because they regarded me. And that's the word that always comes to me, is that they regarded me as I stood there. And I knew that they knew every thought, word, deed, omission and commission I had ever done in my entire life. And as I stood there judging all of it, they stood there not judging all of it, just loving me, just loving me. And I have to say, it was a little uncomfortable because, one, we don't have that kind of love on planet Earth. And as I said, I was already busy judging myself, and they weren't. And I had this, it was terrible. I had this horrible impulse to say, yeah, but what about when I did this? But almost as if some part of me thought, they just don't understand how awful I've been, which of course I hadn't really been awful, but in a way I felt like I had been or something. So, but they just regarded me, and with such infinite love. And I kind of felt like they and everything else in that place I had been yearning for my entire life. And they had been yearning for me. It was as if heaven was not complete as long as I wasn't there. It was a very strange sensation. And I really loved it, but at the same time, it felt like I couldn't quite wear that costume. I couldn't quite put it on, I couldn't wear it. I couldn't own it completely. So at some point, since they weren't going to start talking, I said, okay, so let's recap. What the heck was that? What was that life? It's like, why did I have it? What was it for? What's the whole meaning of all of that crap? Because it's terrible there. And, now that I realize I belong here, what on earth, what could have induced me to leave? And it just doesn't make any sense. So they started to tell me, you know, telepathically, of course, because nobody has a physical mouth. And I had many of the classic elements of a NDE, but I did not have a life review per se. Because in the standard life review, you feel the emotions that other people that you have had an impact on are feeling, and you feel the impact that you had to like the second and possibly third degree. And I did not have that. I had like a bank of video screens, and I kind of like fast forwarded through my whole life and watched it. And, you know, I was kind of like going, oh, you know, oh, that's good. Oh, you know, as I saw all this stuff, but I didn't feel it, you know, except that, you know, I was in total judgment mode. And, you know, they kind of said, well, you know, you did great. I'm like, what? You didn't just see the same video I did. And I said, well, but why? So then they showed me all these past lives the same way, just fast forward through all of them. And I'm like, whoa, kind of like how you feel if you've binge watched like 35 episodes of a show without taking a break. I mean, that's kind of the way I felt at the end. It's like, and a lot of it made sense. I could see how like one life built on another life, the experiences and stuff. And I said, but okay, so I get all that, and I appreciate the recap, but you know, there's just no reason for me to go back. Is it just going to keep going on like this? I mean, you know, people are mean there, and there's no love on that planet, and it's hard to get anything done. You feel like you're, you know, walking through hip deep molasses, or if you don't know what molasses are, hip deep peanut butter or something. And it's just, everything is hard. And what's the point? And they did show me the future of humanity, and it looked great. And I said, yeah, but look at where we are right now. I mean, how long is it going to take us to get there? That's all well and good, but you know, how long is that going to take? And I don't remember an answer to that question, except perhaps it's up to humanity. But I said, but no matter what, you know, I don't want to go back. And basically, you know, I'm not going back, and you can't make me. And I'm not going back, and you can't make me. And they said, no, you don't have to go back. You accomplish the baseline of what you wanted to accomplish in this life, and you're done if you want to be done. And I'm like, woo, okay, thank you. I'll be leaving now. I'll be, you know, going out and seeing my friends. And then I heard, but let us show you what you can accomplish if you go back. And then I woke up in the emergency room, and I started to swear. And I was like, why am I here? I was horrified. Why am I here? And this nurse comes over. This was hilarious in retrospect. At the time, it was not so funny. But the nurse comes over and says, you're in the hospital. you were in a car accident. And I looked at her, I said, no, why am I here? She looks at me and she says, you were in a car accident. I'm like, never mind. So at that point, a police officer walked up to me and handed me a ticket for driving with my headlights off. And I just kind of said to all of those beings of light, are you kidding me? This is just not right. And I was mad. I was really, really mad. And I spent probably 5 to 7 years in a fairly deep depression because I did not want to be back here. And I think looking back, most of it was probably just resistance to being back in a body. It was like, fine, and I'm not going to live. I'm just going to be here, you know. Of course, that didn't make my life any easier, being very depressed. Because, you know, when you have people say, I'd love to have an NDE, and it's like, yeah, you want that like 5 minutes in bliss. But let me tell you, the next 30 years aren't so fun because, you know, having an NDE is like somebody puts your life in a blender and turns the blender on without the top on it. And your life kind of goes up in little pieces up onto the ceiling. And you have to like pick down the pieces and put them back together in some kind of reasonable way. And so I just didn't know what to do with myself. I realized that my perspective on life had completely changed, and that love was the most important thing. And for us to be love, and for us to be who we are. And I realized that I didn't even know who that was, because I had spent my whole life being, you know, having no self-esteem and twisting myself into a pretzel trying to please other people. I had no idea who I was. I very quickly, within a couple of years, I had decided I had to leave my job. So I quit that job and took another job, which was not going to go anywhere. And then I ended up quitting that one, and I ended up working as a temp for 2 years and going insane slowly. And so the next few years were just not fun. And the saving grace was that I started to realize that even though I could not remember why I had come back, you know, I knew I had come back with a mission. I couldn't remember what it was. I couldn't think of anything that would be important enough for me to have changed my mind and come back. But I also knew that I had changed my mind. It was not, I've had people say, oh, they tricked you. And it's like, no, they did not trick me. I knew that I had changed my mind. I just didn't know why. And that really ticked me off. And, you know, so the first 5 years, I just prayed for them to tell me why I had changed my mind. They didn't tell me. So, but within a couple of weeks, so I realized that I had made somehow in that time that I couldn't remember, I had made some agreements. One was that I would not be physically hurt very much, and I wasn't. I had hit my head on the steering wheel and then ricocheted into the into the windshield, no seatbelt, and slammed my knees into the dashboard. And my knees were tender for a year or so afterwards. And to this day, I can still tell you if it's going to snow by the way my knees feel. But other than that, and I was black and blue on this whole side of my face for about 8 weeks, and had all kinds of strangers come up to me and ask me if I needed help, which was fascinating to me because I had never gotten help from strangers before. And it took me a while to realize that they thought that I was like a battered woman. And it was like, no, I was in a car accident. I'm fine. Everything's okay, you know, but thank you, you know. But I thought that was really sweet. It's like, oh my God, complete strangers are coming up to me and asking me if they can help me. That never happened. There is some love on this planet, not a lot, but there's some. So I was dealing with that and wrapping my head around that. And also within about 6 weeks of the car accident, I found someone who was channeling. And I had been to a number of psychics in my time. But after reading the Seth material, and especially the material about the classes that they had, I had said to the universe, it's like, you know what? I want to have classes like that. I want to find somebody who channels quality stuff. And I want to go to classes, and I want it to be near me because I'm not going to Rochester, New York. So I found this woman who I got referred by actually a temp in the office to this woman who was just starting to channel publicly. And I had my first reading with channeled beings. And I was a little nervous because I didn't know what that all entailed, but the woman had a cat named Louie. And as she was starting to go into trance and to have the channeled beings come in, Louie jumped up on my lap and curled up and went to sleep. And I thought, if Louie's not bothered, neither am I. So I had my channeled reading. And the first thing I said was, you know, what the heck was that? What is that happened with my car accident? And they said, well, first off, let's call it an incident, because as you know, there are no accidents. And I was like, okay, here we go. These guys are going to annoy me. And they did. I have to tell you, over time, I had numerous readings with them, and I actually ended up being able to take channeled classes with them for a couple of years. And they really gave me a jump start on integrating what had happened and what I had learned. And you know, we use these terms like integration. Now, but does anybody know what that really means? For me, it meant I had this whole new perspective that did not fit with the way I had been living my life. And I had to adjust my life. I had to adjust my personality. I had to adjust my way of being in the world to be in more cohesion with that new perspective. And if you've ever tried to change a habit, you know how hard that is. But I grew up at a time when the prevailing sense of humor was sarcasm and teasing, and always at someone else's expense. And because I was a psychic little kid and intelligent and read a lot and had a great vocabulary. I was the queen of the snappy comeback and the queen of the sarcastic remark. And I saw very clearly that because I had such poor self-esteem, I was using that and my understanding of metaphysics, my vast knowledge, you know, to club people and to make myself feel superior. And I also realized that that was a hostile action. But I was 35 years old. It's like, how do you change a habit? How do you change your personality after 35 years of doing it that way? So that was one of the biggest challenges of changing the way I interacted with the world, and having to catch myself when I lapsed back, and being constantly on the alert to stop myself when I started to fall into that. And so the integration for me was learning to live in a way that expressed my new perspective that love is the most important thing. And, you know, meanwhile, you know, I'm quitting my job because I feel like it's sucking the spirit out of me. And I'm not finding a new job. So I'm working as a temp in order to pay my rent. And, you know, my life is miserable and I'm totally depressed. It was not pretty. And at one point I was with the channeled guides and I said, you know, I feel like I'm on a raft in the middle of the ocean and I can't see land in any direction. And I don't even know which way to paddle. And in their typical way, they said, yes, that's exactly right. And I'm like, that's not the answer I was looking for. It's like, I know that's how I feel. What do I do about it? And they said, you need to find out who you are. And I said, yeah, but I haven't got a clue. And I don't know how to go about doing that. How do you do that? And they said, by, you know, and what's the term? Now I can't even, the term doesn't even come in. Trial and error. By trial and error. It's like you try something, you say, did I like it? Did I not like it? Am I kind of meh? And as you go through and try different things and make that assessment, you start to find out who you are, what you like, what brings you joy. And I thought, God, that's going to be a long process. And they said, yes, but it's kind of like you're building a mosaic, and each time you get new information about yourself, you put down another tile. And the tile, the mosaic gets filled in over time and becomes richer with all the colors, and you start to see who you are. You start to see the finished product. So I was like, okay. So I had my marching orders, and that's what I was trying to do. And in the meantime, I'm also trying to figure out, so what was my mission? Why did I come back? And it's so funny how humans automatically go to like the resume kind of thing. It's like you go to the job description. It's like, all right, I need to find what I was supposed to do to put on the CV. And so I wrote a book. And at that time, people were not writing books about their NDE. There were only, I think, 2 books out there that talked about NDEs. So I wrote a fantasy novel, and where the heroine goes to a parallel world, and she learns all this stuff about how life works based on what I learned during my NDE. But that went the rounds. I had an agent and all this other stuff. It went the rounds and it went the rounds and it went the rounds, and it never went anywhere. So I'm like, okay, I guess that wasn't it. So at some point, I had people say, oh, you're a healer, you're a healer. And most of the time I said, absolutely not. Never gonna do it, not gonna do it. And I would have these flashes of having been stoned to death and stuff like that. And kind of like, not in this life. I've been killed in terrible ways for doing that in other lives, and I'm not doing it. But so I ended up taking Reiki. And, you know, I hung out my shingle to do Reiki, and that never went anywhere. And I kept thinking, well, what am I supposed to be doing? What's my mission? Why won't you tell me what my mission is? It is not fair. You convinced me to change my mind and come back here because of what I could accomplish. And I have no idea what that is. So, and this was an ongoing, like decades long kind of one-sided argument. And I just didn't get any revelations that came. So I started 5 years after learning Reiki, I learned about reconnective healing, and I took that class from Dr. Eric Pearl. And the interesting thing with that was that when I felt the frequencies of reconnective healing, they felt like the energies of home. And I was like, whoa, this is the real deal. So I hung out my shingle. That didn't go anywhere anywhere fast anyway. So I kept churning it around and churning it around, and I kept thinking over my NDE, and as time went by, especially as I talked about it, more and more details would come to me. I would remember more and more details about it. And one of the things was, you know, why did I asked why I had made my life so miserable. You know, if we had planned this, I found out later, in about 13 years after my NDE, I found my birth family. And I found out that my birth father had died in 1964 of a heart attack. And I saw a picture of him, and there he was, the man I had seen. And I went, okay. And I realized I would have lost a parent either way at a young age. Because I lost my adoptive mother at 12. And if I had stayed with my birth family, I would have lost my father at the age of 14. It's like, well, I guess I really wanted to experience that. I can't imagine why. But I also realized that there was like a contingency plan, because we have free will. So if my birth mother had managed, which apparently it was nice to find out she had really tried to figure out a way to keep me, or to keep me in the family. If that had happened, there was a plan B, possibly a plan C. So that was fascinating to me. And but my, you know, my childhood was, I had many more opportunities than I would have had. but emotionally, it was very, very difficult for me. And as I had a fairly harsh father and, a person of his times, and I was extremely sensitive, and I integrated, everything that was thrown at me, even in jest. And that's where we get into how hostile the teasing sarcasm can be. They can like cut you to the quick and say, I was just teasing, well, they've still cut you to the quick, no matter what they were trying to do. So I had said, why did I do that? Why did I make it so hard? And they said, because you had tried for many lifetimes to learn self-love. And it's a really hard one. And this time, because of some things you would like to do later in life, could only do if you had learned self-love, you were determined to learn it or die trying. And I said, it almost killed me. And they said, almost? It's like, okay. So through this whole process of self-discovery and building this mosaic, I was also learning about self-love, because you can't love yourself if you don't know who you are. Although if I stood up in front of a room full of, 1,000 people and said, how many of you love yourself? Probably everybody would put their hands up. But we've all been like taught that we're, basically fatally flawed from the crib. And so it was a process, and it took a long time. And over that time, I slowly started, as I started becoming drawn to talking about my experience to people. I made my first YouTube video in 2007. The head of the Maryland IANDS group asked me one day to stay after the meeting and said, hey, how'd you like to talk on camera about your experience? And I'm like, oh, okay. I had never done that before. So I sat down and talked for 10 minutes. And then he called me later and said, I've posted it on YouTube, and I had a panic attack because I felt so vulnerable. And but that kind of started something rolling, and I started talking more about my experience and owning my experience and having all kinds of reactions to my experience, and learning, somebody else's reaction to my experience is not my problem. That's their stuff. But I started getting more confidence, and slowly over a number of years, I started doing more and more presentations. And I looked back and I thought, when I came back from my NDE so many years ago, if I had known, and you're going to be up in front of a lot of people talking about this experience, I would have run screaming into traffic, because there was not a chance that I was going to do that. So I slowly realized that there was a reason I didn't know. I had to grow into myself. I had to grow into self-esteem. I had to grow into self-love. And then I could discover some of the things I was supposed to do. But of course, part of the mission was to go through the process of finding out who I was, learning about self-love, learning about self-esteem. That was all part of the mission. It's never just, I'm going to go do X. As I went through this process, I also realized that every single one of us has our own note to play in the symphony. And all too often, we reject the instrument that we're supposed to play, and we say, oh, I want to play the oboe like Susie, I want to be like her or like him. But we can't do that, because what would a symphony be like if everybody played the oboe? We need to have all of those different kinds of instruments playing their different notes and their different tones and their different vibrations. And each of us has that. And if we can't learn and allow ourselves to be authentic, then we are not playing our note in the symphony. And the symphony needs us to play our note, especially right now. So that's pretty much what I learned, what I experienced. I did have to go to court because I got that ticket for driving without my headlights. And all the way to court, I had to hire an attorney, go to court, all the way to court. I'm saying, I can't tell the judge. I saw him come over and turn my lights off as I was hovering above my car. You better fix this. And they did. They did. The person who hit me did not show up. And the police officer was asked, why did you give her this ticket? And he said, well, the other driver said, and my attorney said, hearsay, Your Honor, and they dismissed the case. It's like I had to hire an attorney for that. But anyway, at least they took care of it. So
You had to pay it.
but I had to pay the attorney, but I didn't have to pay the fine for the ticket or anything. So that's kind of my story, and I'm sticking to it. It's been a long journey. I always say I'm a very slow learner. Other people may integrate their experiences much faster than I did. I like to think slow but thorough. But to me, it's sort of like, it's like any process of integrating any kind of spiritually transformational experience, is that it takes time, and we do it in layers. And every time you think you've done with one thing, it comes around again at a different level, and you have to deal with it again in a slightly different way. But it's all part of, that's how we get to mastery, is going through all those different lessons and all of those different aspects and all those different facets of everything we're learning. And it takes time. And if we, to me, it's like, if you have an NDE and suddenly you think you know everything in the universe and you're like the bomb, you haven't integrated anything. So it's because it's probably the most ongoing humbling experience that anybody can imagine. So but it makes you real sooner or later. So we have, I guess, about 45 minutes, Diane. I'm happy to take questions, or I can just keep yakking.
Now, often people write questions on the chat box. That's a good way to do it. So if you have questions for Ellyn,
Oh, do I have to read those?
I can read them to you.
Oh, please.
But at the moment there aren't any. So if you want,
Okay, guys, ask a question.
a good question is, you know, how really were you changed by this experience? How would you describe the changes that happened to you and who you are? Have you reached a self-knowledge of self-acceptance and love and so on?
I have, finally. It took a long time. I have. And of course, I realized that, you know, if you're learning self-love, what are you going to give yourself? You're going to give yourself experiences of abandonment, rejection, lack of validation. And I had that in spades my whole life. And because you're trying to have the love be inside you, the love and acceptance inside yourself rather than from these other people. And I was told it's like once you have that spark of self-love, no one can ever take it away. And that was why when I said I don't want to go back, and they said you don't have to, because you really have done what you came to do. You learned self-love, you started that spark. But coming back, I was able to fine tune it and master it. And it did. I learned that it's all about love, that's all that matters. And I had been living in a way that was not very loving to people because I had such low self-esteem that I was always on the defensive. And so, as I said, I had to change my whole personality because it was just not consistent with what I then, I came to know was true about who we are and who we're supposed to be in the world. And it was a long, difficult process.
Yeah, truly. Okay, we've got one question. Alistair Stahlberg asks, what is reconnective healing? How do you work with someone?
Oh, okay. Reconnective healing is
Eric Pearl.
It was introduced by Dr. Eric Pearl in the mid to late 90s, I think. I took the class in 2005. It is a spectrum of vibration that brings light, love, and information. It heals on the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual levels. It is cognizant, it's conscious, it's intelligent. And when you have a practitioner and a client and the reconnective healing frequencies in a room, the two humans are not the smartest ones. Reconnective healing frequency knows what needs to be healed in any given moment on whatever level. And so it's very effective. It's effective in person, or it's also effective over distance. Some say it's more effective over distance. It's not hands-on. But people always get a healing. They get the healing that they need. It might not necessarily be the healing that they think they need. And I can give a quick example. I have on my website, which is lionmagic.com. I have my favorite healing story is a guy came in with a he had rotator cuff surgery. And he said it wasn't healing fast enough. And he said, I'm willing to try this. It's like, okay. And he says, do I have to believe in it? And it's like, no, it's not faith healing, you know? And so we did the session, and some people really feel energies, they're sensitive to them, and other people don't. Doesn't mean that they're not there. And he didn't feel anything. And he says, you know, my shoulder still hurts. I don't think anything happened. And I said, I can guarantee you had a healing. And you just may not recognize what it was right now. And it will also unfold over the next couple of weeks. And I said, you know, did you notice anything? Did you feel anything? Did you observe anything? No, no, no. And I said, look, at least I know you were deeply relaxed, because I could see how your breathing got deeper and slower. And that shows me that's a visible reflection of going deeper into relaxation. So if nothing else, you deeply relaxed. And he gave me this really funny look, and he took this big breath in, and he said, did you see that? And I'm like, yeah. and he says, I haven't breathed that deeply in months. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, my doctor's concerned because I've been having, I've been losing lung capacity over like the last 6 months. And he took another deep breath, and he says, I haven't breathed that deeply in a long time. And it just suddenly hit me. And I started laughing, and I said, well, don't you think if you're now getting enough oxygen into your blood, into your system, that's going to the shoulder, don't you think it's going to heal a lot faster now? And that the deeper healing was the breathing issue. And it was like, whoa. So, but he was convinced that nothing had happened. And, but so that's how it worked. I mean, I loved Reiki. But to me, reconnective healing is sort of like Reiki on steroids.
Yeah, I would just insert just a note here. If everybody here, if you have not read Eric Pearl's book, Reconnective Healing, I suggest you put it on your to-do list, because it's an absolutely wonderful book. His mother had a near-death experience. I had the good fortune to know her as well.
Oh,
And his father. And
oh, you know them? I didn't know you knew them, Diane.
yeah,
I love Eric. I've worked with him many times. So
I took reconnective healing as well, and he spoke for our group, and he'd come in town for something. He and his wife had come in town for something else, and I picked them up at the airport and took them to their hotel. And
okay, cool.
I had actually met him 30 years ago when he did a talk for the Unity in Chicago. And I was curious about it. And a friend and I went and sat in the front row, and he was doing a demonstration. He had a massage table set up, and there was a person sitting there, and he was doing a demonstration, and he raised his hand like this. And I'd had surgery, and they injured my back. I think they dropped me when I was unconscious, and continuing difficult pain on the right side of my back. And he raised his hand, and it went bing like that, and was healed. And I wasn't the demonstration model. I just got the side benefit. So when I brought him home from the airport to speak to our group that weekend, and I told him on the way home that what was happening. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And he told me to wait, and he took his wife in and settled her in the hotel, and he came back out, and he said, I'm going with you. And he came home with me, and he climbed over my daughter's messy room to get the massage table, set it up, gave me a healing for free, and insisted that I don't drive him back. He called an Uber and went back to the hotel.
He's such a sweetheart.
Yeah,
I just saw him in November. They did a class down here in Virginia Beach, so I went over and saw him.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's a sweetie, and it's really, I mean, it's To
But
me, it's very profound work.
But it's definitely worth a read for that.
Oh, his book, it's called Heal Others, Heal Yourself by Dr. Eric Pearl.
Called Reconnective Healing, I think. The book is called Reconnective Healing.
Well, maybe that's the subtitle must be Heal Others, Heal Yourself.
Mhm.
And his website is thereconnection.com.
Okay,
There's a link on my website to his website.
good. Okay, we have another question here. Joe says, why is self-love so important as opposed to love for others? Or are they considered interdependent of each other?
What I have come to feel or to believe is that most of the, I would say probably all of the problems in the world are the result of a lack of self-love. Because when we have self-love, we don't have to compete. We don't have to convince other people that we're right. We don't have to put down other people so that we feel better about ourselves. So many things that are not loving in this world are the result of a lack of self-love. And talking to people, of realizing, especially the way that, most of us have been raised in a way to one degree or another that teaches us, that the way we act is wrong, that there's something wrong with us and we have to learn to behave this way and don't be that way, and don't follow your heart because you think you're going to be a musician, but you can't make money doing that. So we've been taught to kind of like make ourselves to do all these other things that are not part of self-love. And as I learned the hard way, a lot of us don't even know who the heck we are because we've been so busy trying to please other people, because that's what we were taught we needed to do in order to get along in the world. And, if we wouldn't have a hunger problem if people in the world had self-love, because nobody would have to hoard wealth. It could be readily shared, because you also, as you learn self-love, you also step more into recognizing like your place in the universe, that you are one with all that is, that you are one with everyone. And as such, if you can let go of the illusion of control, you can just relax into the knowledge that you are always taken care of, that you are always protected, that you are always supported, that you always have your needs met. But most of the time, because we don't believe that, we're out there like, I've got to make this happen. I've got to make this happen. And a lot of that action is in fact pushing the help away. When if we could just relax and know that we're supported, that we are loved. It's like when we love ourselves, we understand that the universe, that God loves us, that we have value, that we are valued. And from that place, then we can be more loving to other people, because we're not busy being defensive and reactive. So I have come over the last like 10 years, I'd say I've really come to focus on the idea of self-love and just how important it is, and just how many people don't have it because we call it selfish. We set a boundary and say no to somebody and they tell us we're selfish. But that's self-love, that because our first job is figuring out who we are and taking care of ourselves.
Right.
not making other people happy.
Yes,
I hope that answered your question.
that's good. Thank you. Sandy says, did you ever seek hypnosis in your quest to find out why you decided to return when you had your NDE?
I have past life regressions, but I didn't. In fact, I had one before my NDE, and I think I had one many years after. Because I got to the point where I would go somewhere and all of a sudden a file would kind of open in my mind of this whole past life that I had in that place. I go to Europe and it's wild, you know, it's like, but I don't think I actually went and said I want to be hypnotized to ask why. Maybe at that point I didn't want to know. I'm not sure.
Hypnosis would necessarily do it.
Right. It might not, if it wasn't time for me to know. And as I said, I've come to believe, you know, the universe or my guides or my higher self or whatever, you know, puts a bag over my head because they know if I can see what's coming, I'll run screaming in the opposite direction. You know, if they had said you're going to stand up in front of people and talk about your life, including the humiliating parts, I'd be like, there isn't a chance, you know, no way. But so, yeah, I get the bag over my head a lot, and it might have just been, you know, every time I kind of thought to do it, somebody plucked the idea out of my mind. So I forgot, you know, I don't know. I just never did that.
We are definitely guided.
Oh, totally. That's the other thing. When, you know, once you come to understand that we're supported and protected and loved and guided at all times, you know, it's like, hey, I don't have to handle all of this stuff. You know, I've got help. You know? And I talk to my guides all the time. I sound like a bag lady, but, you know, because I'm like, handle that. You know, I don't know what to do about it, you know. And it does. But when we're in our ego, when we have to prove to ourselves that we're smart or we're right or we're what, then we're trying to make things happen. And when we can let that ego relax and we can say, you know, help me out here, folks, you know, it's kind of like that's when the magic happens.
It's about showing up, paying attention, and not being attached to the outcome.
Yes, exactly.
Not being attached to the outcome is an enormous,
That's the hardest part.
but it's an enormous tool. You know, anything, when you're trying to use your head instead of your heart and letting go, it makes it harder.
Yes. And a lot of times by clinging to a certain outcome, we're limiting the possibilities for ourselves and we don't even know it.
Exactly.
Because the universe can deliver something far better than you could ever imagine for yourself.
Exactly.
If you just let it and if you follow the cues.
Exactly. Ben says, how does a person find out who she really is? And how can we be certain of our mission in this incarnation?
Well, I think the process to find out who you are is probably similar to what I went through, of just trying different things and really assessing if you like them or not. And giving yourself permission to say no to somebody who says, oh, let's go do this. I was always like, it didn't matter what it was. I'd say, okay, you know, and then I'd get home and I'd say, why did I do that? I hated that, you know, and then 2 weeks later, I'd be saying yes to it again. It's like, what the heck? So if you trying different things and finding out what you like, what you don't like, what feels right, what feels bad, that's how you learn what your limits are. the things that you want to do, and then practicing saying no and setting boundaries is a huge thing. That took me decades. And people started calling me selfish and all kinds of nasty names because I started saying no suddenly, and they weren't used to that. But following it, Joseph Campbell said it, follow your bliss and let your heart, as Diane said, let your heart lead you. If you go for a job interview and your head says, oh, this is great because it has all of the things I want and it'll pay a good salary, and your heart is going, listen to your heart. It's not the right job. Because your heart knows. It's like your heart has the map, and the more you can follow your heart and what your heart tells you, and that just takes practice of what does it sound like to listen to your heart? How does your heart tell you what it wants to tell you? It's just practice. It's like that, that small voice within. And the more you practice, you can keep an intuition journal, and you could say, I had this hunch and it turned out it was right. I had this hunch and I followed it and it was right. I had this hunch and I didn't follow it, but it was still right. These are all ways that step by step you can learn this stuff, and it's just doing the practice and trusting yourself. The more you can disengage the self-doubt, the better. Because we talk ourselves, we get messages all the time, every single person, and we talk ourselves out of it. Was that a message from my guides? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I'll just sit on the couch again,
Ben also asked how we can be certain of our mission in this incarnation. How do we know we're doing the right thing?
You don't.
I think, well, because it depends on how you define mission. To me, our mission is to be who we are, to be here on the planet, being who we are, playing our note in the symphony and not playing somebody else's note. And the more authentic we can be, the more we are doing our mission, because our mission is not a job description. Our mission is not, you're going to get this job. Our mission is not, you're going to write a book. Our mission is not, you're going to go and do X. Unless you feel totally driven to do it, then do it. That's probably, you decided you wanted that on your life path. But other than that, if you're being as authentic as you can be, and you're following your heart, you're doing your mission. You're doing your purpose. If you're trying to keep your vibration up, walking in love, you're doing it. That's my perspective.
One thing I learned on the other side is that there is no one way to do anything. So I think, if you love yourself as best you can, and you ask for guidance and follow it to the best of your ability, you just have to listen and trust and know that what's happening is for the right thing for you. I believe this is the Earth School. We come here for lessons. And when the lessons are over, we go home. I don't think they let you go home until you're finished what you came to do, for the most part. So you have to listen and trust, and know that things are being taken care of. Any more questions? I don't see anything else here. Does anybody have anything else to add?
No questions at all? Come on, people.
I wanted to make sure to mention that this weekend is the Spiritual Awakenings Conference. If anybody doesn't have anything to do the rest of the day or tomorrow, go to spiritualawakeningsinternational.com and join in on their conference. They've got some wonderful speakers, and it's definitely a worthy thing to do. We have another question here. Let's see. Mary says, could we hear more of your story? Really appreciate the wisdom you've shared with us.
Oh, thank you. More of my story. So more of my NDE story or more of my life story?
Well, it's probably continuous.
Oh, either one, I see. Okay. Well, let's see. Where to start? I think the hardest part for me was the whole letting go of the outcome. And that was one of the things that the channeled guides taught in the class. They beat us over the head with it over and over and over and over again. Let go of the outcome. And they gave the example of, so you're going to buy a house. And, you know, you do your research, you figure out how much you can afford, and you check out the neighborhoods, and you figure out which neighborhoods you can afford to live in, and you figure out, you know, what kind of house you can have. And then you come up with, you know, I want a house with a white picket fence and a red door and a blah, 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 blah in this neighborhood. And what I learned was that, you know, a lot of people say if you're going to try to manifest, you need to be extremely detailed. For me, that doesn't work. It works the absolute opposite. Because when we submit an order like that with those details, you know, your guides take it under advisement and start working on it. But because you've been so detailed, it might take longer to find that. Now, in the meantime, I mean, you know, they might find a perfectly good house that you could afford, but it doesn't have a white picket fence. Now, you could go and put a white picket fence up, but if you said it has to have a white picket fence, then they're not going to show it to you. And in the meantime, there might be a fantastic house in this other neighborhood that you thought you could not afford, that you ruled out. And it comes up and they need to sell it quick, and they're selling it at like a fire sale. And you could buy that. You're not going to find it because you're over here looking in this neighborhood, because obviously you can't afford that neighborhood. So when we just say, for me, and I manifested a condo this way, I'm telling you, it was magic. I started out with the essence of what I want. I want a home where I can thrive and I can be happy. And I'm in a safe, lovely neighborhood and I can afford it, you know, and I have nice neighbors and I enjoy living there and I blossom. And, you know, I kind of left the rest of, I said, okay, these are some things I'd like to have, like X number of bathrooms, X number of bedrooms, this, that, and the other thing. You know, kind of like, you know what I want, go handle it. And so I didn't narrow it down. I mean, I had like a range, you know, a financial range of what I thought I could pay or what I would have to pay. And I ended up getting this fabulous place for, you know, like $30,000 less than I thought I would have to pay in a neighborhood that I thought I couldn't afford, and all of that stuff. And it was like, wow, I'm glad I didn't tie your hands, because, you know, our guides and our higher selves, you know, they know what's out there and they know what'll make us happy, and they can find us for it, but find it for us. But if we put too many specifics in there, I mean, PMH Atwater says you submit your order and the universal order clerk goes, received and stamps it. And so, and that's what happens, you know, that they'll do what we ask them to do. And that's the other thing, you have to remember to ask for assistance.
It helps.
Because they, you know, they really can't, unless we're about to die and we're not supposed to, they really aren't supposed to intervene unless we ask. So I ask for help with everything: parking spaces, groceries on sale, you know, everything.
Marilyn asked if your guides talk about how and when will become a more peaceful world. Will it take centuries more? Question mark.
It doesn't have to. We will have a peaceful world when we have peace in our own hearts. It's like, how many people go out and picket for peace and then go home and, you know, yell at their kids? We have to, every change starts within. We have to have peace. And as I always say, we're going to create heaven on earth one soul at a time, because as each soul, as each person creates that in their own world, creates peace in their own world, then we will slowly reach the tipping point. But we have to do it first. We can't be waiting for, oh, you know, the powers that be, or the people in charge, or the, you know, the Congress, or the president, or the king, or whoever, to make peace. It has to start with us. And, you know, when bad things happen, people come to me and say, why does God let that happen? And I say, why do humans let it happen? We are the manifestation, you know, a 3D manifestation of God, of all that is, of the creative force of the universe. Why do we let it happen? So it really, to me, meaningful change always comes first from within. And it doesn't have to, it could change like that if enough people change their mind. It doesn't have to take that long, but it's up to humans. You know, one of the things I hear in my head all the time is, oh, what will humans pick? Because we have free will. We're constantly making choices. What are we going to pick today? It's up to us. It's not up to them.
Right.
And also, if you stop and look at it, it's not our job to save the world, and we can't do it. But we can create heaven on earth in our own little turf, in our own little spot where we live. And the more mini heavens on earth we have, the sooner we create the tipping point.
Ben asks, why is it that when I ask my guides for help or assistance, they ignore me? Why do they do that? Clearly, they are not answering to my help, to my request for help.
Well, and I would say they are answering you. And maybe you're not perceiving the answer, or perceiving the nudges, or you haven't let go of the outcome, or you're busy looking over there and they're saying, why don't you go over here? Why don't you go over here?
And
But you're looking over here. So that can be one thing. It can take some time and some practice to recognize the way that our guides communicate with us. And it's different for every person. Some people see little videos in their heads. Some people hear things. Some people, sometimes I will get answers by watching a TV show, and some random line of dialogue will just go zzz, and it's like, oh, that's the answer to my question. One time I had a bus pull up next to me in traffic, and there was like an advertisement on the side of the bus, and the slogan for the product was the answer to my question. And I'm like, you guys are crazy, but I got my answer. So it can take some honing. Our guides never ignore us. My vision of it that I get is that, we have all these people, all these guides are standing around in a room, smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee, waiting for us to ask for help. And as soon as we say something, they jump up and go do. But the hardest part, it's not, it's not something like picking up the phone. It's not that clear sometimes. And, sometimes my most frequent prayer is, give me clarity. Give me what you're trying to tell me. I'm not getting it, hit me with the 2x4, because subtlety doesn't work. So work with them. Say, are you answering my prayer? Help me out here. And I yell at them sometimes. I am not one of those oh so solemn, oh great guides, please help me. I'm like, what are you doing? Get up off your butt and find me a parking space, So, have fun with them, play with them, and see if that works.
Catherine says, how do I know when I'm in self-denial when another uses words that don't resonate with me, words that are critical of who I am?
I would say you sit with that, and you sit with it. Does this seem, if someone's critical of something that you did, sit with that and do an honest assessment. And you might come up with, yeah, I could see how somebody could think that, but I don't think I'm really doing that. I could understand how somebody could take it that way, because, there was this poster in the 60s, and I wish I had bought one, because it started out with, I know you think I understood what you said, but what I understood you saying was different from what you thought you said. And it goes on and on about communication is just, it's astonishing that anybody communicates anything with anybody, because communication all comes through our own stuff. And at one point, as I was moving into this self-love thing, I realized I had heard, it might have been Eleanor Roosevelt who said, what you think of me is none of my business. And I thought, wow, how can you think that? But then you realize it's like our perceptions of other people are based on our issues, our level of healing or unhealing, our emotional baggage or lack of emotional baggage, our buttons and whether they've been pushed or not. And the same applies to other people. So if somebody, gives you a criticism, you can sit with them and say, well, okay, that person perceived that what I did was this or whatever. That wasn't my intention. What I meant, what blah, blah, blah. But if you're open, if you don't have enough self-love that you can actually sit with that and consider if it's true, then you're going to go into denial. But once you reach a certain point of knowing who you are, you know, and if somebody says to me, Ellen, you're always late, I'm like, yeah, I own that, you know. It's just me, you know. I've been like that all my life, and I always will be. So there you have it. You know, and it doesn't sting. There's no button. There's no, you don't take in any criticism, because it's like, yeah, I know I have that flaw. Oh, well, you know, I have other good parts, you know, and we all have both. So part of self-love is recognizing the good, the bad, and the ugly, and embracing all of it, and knowing that good, bad, and ugly are just judgments that we make.
Mhm.
But we all have these aspects to ourselves. You know, it's like, I'm never going to be a math genius in this life. And it's like, hey, that's just the truth. And that's okay.
Okay. You have other things.
Exactly. And that's, again, learning to know yourself. What do you love to do? You know, will show you what you're good at, what your gifts are, and how you can express those gifts and that authentic self into the world. Even if you have to just have it as a hobby. I mean, you know, we all have to pay rent. But, you know, even if you just have to have that as a hobby, expressing your creative side, that's your essence, that's your authentic self. And
That's,
we all need to express that into the world.
that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ellen. This has really been a wonderful session. Marilyn said, thank you for what you said about self-love, the most clear explanation of why it's important that I've ever heard. I think you did an excellent job, and we really appreciate your coming to us today and sharing with us. And hopefully we'll see you again sometime.
I appreciate your inviting me, and I appreciate such an attentive audience, and thank you very much. I mean, you know, it's that whole thing, as Ramdas said, we're all just walking each other home. So I firmly believe that we do so much better when we hold hands and do it together than when we try to do it alone. And that kind of has become my message of, you know, hey, we're all okay. We're all really good, as a matter of fact, and we're the only ones judging ourselves. So we need to give ourselves a break.
Sarah put the quote in here. I know you think you understand what you thought I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant.
That's it. There was a poster, and I really, for decades, I've wished I had bought one of those. It was brilliant.
The author is Alan Greenspan.
Thank you.
I'm sure you can find one probably. So again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you all next week and next month to see Pam Kircher talk about what it's like to be an Alzheimer's person. She's interested in doing research on spiritual experiences in Alzheimer's people. So if you have anybody, especially if you have anybody in your family, or if you're suffering from any dementia at all in yourself, or you know you have friends who are in that state, this would be a particularly good meeting to attend. She's also an MD, so that gives an additional insight. Even if she is beginning to suffer from Alzheimer's, she has that scientific approach still. And so it should be very, very interesting meeting. So we will see you all then. Yay.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.